In today's Farm Report, an advisory committee has released the 2015 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Report, the framework for the nutrition standards for the next 5 years. Cindy Zimmerman with AgriPulse has more on how Congress is weighing in.
Members of the U.S. House recently weighed in on the 2015 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee report that they believe goes beyond nutrition in its recommendations. Representative Vicky Hartzler of Missouri and 70 colleagues sent a letter to the Secretaries of Agriculture and Health and Human Services outlining their concerns.
What we have here in the recommendations from the advisory committee on them is that it strays away from science and gets into policy decisions where they are recommending that the foods that Americans eat be based on the sustainability of the food, or they are recommending a tax be put on sugar and things that get into policy rather than just saying this is what is good for the human body, this is what is not good. And in years past, they have encouraged the increased use of lean red meat. And this year, they are recommending to decrease the consumption of red meat. And then in an asterisk, in a very tiny print at the bottom, they go ahead and say, but a lean meat can be a good source of good protein. So they're very much trying to minimize and marginalize the eating of meat. And we know by science that lean meat can be and should be a part of a healthy diet.
Hartzler says they're urging the agencies to base the dietary guidelines solely on sound science.
It impacts our school lunch program. It impacts what is served in the military. And it's just the general kind of the Bible for the next 5 years on nutrition, what our country goes by. And so it's very important.
Hartzler, who's a lifelong Missouri farmer and a former nutritional science teacher, is also concerned about the school lunch program now and is co-sponsoring legislation in the House called the Reducing Federal Mandates on School Lunch Act.
And in that, it'll allow more flexibility for the local schools as they implement this. And we also are limiting the reductions to the sodium and so that they can still have some salt in the foods. And we say no more than 50% of the grains have to be whole wheat, because that's been a problem going to 100% whole wheat for pasta, for example, because kids just do not want to eat brown macaroni and cheese.
Reporting for AgriPulse, I am Cindy Zimmerman.
Among the resources USDA is providing to organic producers relates to conservation. Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack speaking to the Organic Trade Association's conference Wednesday in the nation's capital.
We have invested over $111 million in conservation with 6,500 farms that are involved in organic production.
But Vilsack says that figure needs to be increased.
Which is why we're working with NRCS to get some additional technical service providers on board that can begin the process of reaching out to folks where they are on their land to be able to discuss the details of how conservation plans can be worked.
Vilsack adds that USDA has to improve in its execution of this.
I'm relatively certain that producers are anxious to have that information. We just need more boots on the ground, and we're committed to getting that done this year.
Additional information about USDA resources and support for the organic sector is available on the USDA Organics resource page at www.usda.gov/ORGANIC. For USDA Radio, Susan Carter, Washington, D.C.
With Tax Day being last Wednesday, Congress was busy with tax reform, especially on the estate tax, otherwise known as the death tax. Cindy Zimmerman with AgriPulse has more.
As Americans are busy doing taxes this week, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association is busy working with Congress on tax reform issues that are important to farmers and ranchers. NCBA Associate Director of Legislative Affairs Kent Backus says what they would like to see is more permanency to the tax code.
The House has already started working this year on tax reform. They voted to make permanent Section 179 small business expensing as well as a conservation easement tax credit. And the Senate has taken a slightly different approach. They've decided to solicit comments and really look at a more comprehensive tax reform effort. So NCBA is engaging there. We're going to submit some comments here this week. We're going to focus on, making Section 179 permanent at the 2014 levels, making sure that more businesses can take advantage of that. And we're also going to focus on bonus depreciation and making sure that cash accounting remains part of our tax code. We're also going to focus on the 2032A special use valuation, the conservation and easement tax credit, and making sure that the capital gains rates are lowered. And one big fight that we'll have on our hands this year is making sure that the 1031 like-kind exchanges are not eliminated. There's a big push right now to try to get rid of those, and that's an important section of the tax code we want to see left alone.
Backus says they're encouraged by recent actions that could lead to a repeal of the estate tax, which most in agriculture prefer to call the death tax.
We've been very supportive of efforts from Congressman Thornberry from Texas. He's had a bill out there to fully repeal the death tax. And Senator Thune has also had a lot of movement on his bill. In fact, he sponsored an amendment to the budget that actually would create the funding available to repeal the death tax once and for all, and that actually passed. Unfortunately, the budget is non-binding, so we're looking at other efforts. More recently, Congressman Kevin Brady from Texas and Congressman Sanford Bishop from Georgia introduced legislation that authorizes the full repeal of the estate tax. That bipartisan bill was voted out of the Ways and Means Committee in a positive way, which means it's ready to go to the floor. And hopefully, we can see a vote for full repeal of the estate tax this week in the House.
Reporting for AgriPulse, I am Cindy Zimmerman.
When it comes to the dairy outlook this month, milk production is reduced.
Trimmed production 1.1 billion pounds to 210 billion pounds even this month. That decrease in output is on slower growth in milk per cow.
Seth Meyer with USDA's World Agricultural Outlook Board says a majority of this is driven by
lower milk per cow output out of California and drought in the West.
So on the U.S. milk supply and demand sheet,
we did decrease production by 1.1 billion pounds to 210 billion pounds for the 2015 forecast.
On the trade side for milk,
our net export trade position has worsened. We find that we're importing butter fat on strong U.S. butter prices and a strong dollar, which is also making us less export competitive. So we're seeing our net export position worsen on the strength of the dollar and our high domestic butter prices.
For USDA Radio, Susan Carter, Washington, D.C.